The biting winter wind howled outside, pushing against the grand windows of Robert Harrison's mansion. Inside, the warmth of the fire did little to ease the emptiness in his heart. His once vibrant estate, filled with laughter and luxury, now felt more like a tomb, silent and cold. He sat motionless in his wheelchair, staring out the window, his mind lost in memories of a life long gone. At 52, Robert had everything: wealth, fame, and the woman he loved by his side. But all of that was taken from him 2 decades ago, when an accident left him paralyzed from the waist down. His fortune remained, but the life he once knew had crumbled, leaving behind nothing but isolation and regret. As Robert sat there, pondering his dark thoughts, there was a soft knock on the door. He startled, unsure of who would visit him at such an hour. His only remaining servant had left months ago, and the only visitors he'd had in the past year were business calls or lawyers. The knock persisted. Curiosity, though fleeting, nudged Robert from his quiet despair. He wheeled himself slowly to the door, his body stiff with disuse. When he opened it, he was met by a young girl, no more than 6 years old, standing in the doorway. She was small and thin, her clothes ragged, her eyes wide with both hope and fear. "Mister," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "I'm so hungry. Do you have any leftovers you could spare?" Robert froze. Her words pierced through the fog of his self-imposed isolation. Here was a child, standing at his door, asking for food. Not pity, not sympathy, but food. And in that moment, something stirred in him. But the child's next words shocked him even more. "If you trade your leftovers for a miracle," she added, "would you do it? I can make you walk again." Robert laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. A miracle? He hadn't believed in miracles for years. How could this small, scruffy child offer him something so impossible? But there was something in her eyes, a sincerity, a conviction, that made him pause. Robert slowly closed the door behind him, his mind still reeling from the girl's words. The laughter had faded, but the absurdity of what she had said hung in the air like smoke. How could she possibly think she could make him walk again? The doctors had told him there was no hope. 20 years of painstaking treatments, therapies, and surgeries had done nothing. His legs would never move again. As he wheeled himself back toward the fireplace, Robert's mind drifted back to his life before the accident. He had been powerful, admired by all. People sought him out, eager to be in his presence, to bask in his success. He had been a man of influence, respected in business circles, cherished by his wife, Diana. But all that changed in the blink of an eye. After the accident, the phone calls stopped, the invitations dried up, and Diana left him. She couldn't stand living with the bitterness that had replaced the man she had once loved. She left, and Robert had been left with his wealth. Wealth that meant nothing without the love and company he had once taken for granted. His mansion, once a symbol of success, now felt like a prison. The grand hallways echoed with silence, the rooms filled with reminders of what he had lost. No one came anymore. No one cared. Robert Harrison, the great millionaire, had become just another forgotten man, abandoned by those who had once called him their friend. His mind wandered back to the little girl. The audacity of her words. It was almost laughable, but something about her made him wonder. Could a miracle exist? Was it possible to believe in something again? After all these years of despair, could a miracle really change his life? Robert sat back in his wheelchair, pushing the thought of the girl's words out of his mind. He had a lifetime of memories to bury, and no room for childlike fantasies. Miracles were for the hopeful, the naive. He was no longer either. As he stared into the fire, the door creaked open once again. The girl had returned. This time, Robert's patience was gone. He was already irritated by the earlier interruption. Who was this girl, really? What did she want from him? Surely she was just another beggar looking to exploit his wealth. He wasn't in the mood to entertain her nonsense. "What are you doing here?" Robert asked, his voice laced with frustration. "I already told you, I don't have any food for you. Go back to where you came from." The girl stood in the doorway, her small face illuminated by the porch light. She didn't flinch at his harsh tone. Instead, she simply looked up at him with those wide, innocent eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice soft. I didn't mean to bother you. I just wanted to help. Her words hit Robert like a punch to the gut. Here she was, this child, offering him something he couldn't even begin to understand, and he had rejected her. He felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest, but still he pushed it away. It was easier to dismiss her, to close the door, to stay in his cold, self-imposed exile. The girl stood frozen for a moment in the doorway, her small shoulders slumped. Her eyes, though soft and filled with hope, began to darken with a quiet sadness. She was used to rejection, she knew. It was a cold world out there, and kindness often went unnoticed. Robert watched her for a moment longer, something in him stirring. It wasn't pity, not yet, anyway, but a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. As he observed her, his thoughts drifted to his own life. He had been a boy once, full of dreams and untainted hope. Back then, the world had seemed full of possibilities. But now, all that was left was a hollow shell of a man, wandering through his mansion like a ghost. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. The girl didn't hesitate. "Jasmine Thompson." "Jasmine, where are your parents?" She looked down at her feet, nervously fidgeting with the hem of her worn coat. "My mama works late. I live with her. We don't have much." Robert's eyes softened as he saw the vulnerability in her. A quiet ache stirred inside him. He had once been that child, innocent, unafraid, and full of dreams. But those days were long gone. "Are you really hungry?" he asked, though the question felt foolish as soon as he said it. Of course she was hungry. What else would bring a child to his doorstep in the middle of a freezing night? "Yes, mister," Jasmine replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to trouble you. I just thought you might have something left over. I heard that rich people throw away food." Robert felt a sharp pang of shame at her words. Here he was, a millionaire, sitting in the lap of luxury, while this child went hungry. He could have easily given her a meal, but his pride had gotten in the way. "Come inside," he said, his voice strained. "I'll get you something to eat." Jasmine's eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time that night, a flicker of warmth seemed to return to her face. She stepped into the house, cautiously, her eyes scanning the opulent surroundings. For a moment, Robert wondered what she thought of his mansion. Did she see it as a place of comfort, or just another cold, empty shell? He led her to the kitchen, the clatter of dishes echoing in the silence. As Robert prepared the food, his mind continued to race. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to come back, or for him to feel anything at all. But here she was, sitting at his kitchen table, eating a meal that he could have provided for so many others, if only he had opened his heart to them. Robert glanced at Jasmine as she ate, her small hands clutching the plate. Despite her worn clothes and tired eyes, there was something undeniably pure about her. She didn't care about the wealth he had. She wasn't impressed by his mansion or his money. She was just a child, hungry and full of hope, believing that kindness could somehow make things better. He, on the other hand, had spent the last 20 years hoarding his wealth like a shield, protecting himself from the world. But all it had done was isolate him further. His once thriving social circles had long since vanished, leaving him with nothing but the hollow shell of his old life. His wealth could buy him anything except happiness. "Why did you come here, Jasmine?" Robert asked quietly, watching her as she ate. "Why did you come to me?" She looked up from her plate, her eyes bright and honest. "Because you look like you needed help, mister, and I wanted to help you. My mama always says that kindness is magic. If you help someone, maybe they'll help you back." Robert blinked, her words catching him off guard. He had been so focused on his own pain, his own bitterness, that he hadn't stopped to consider that kindness could change things, that could make even a man like him feel something again. As she finished her meal, Jasmine looked up at him with a curious expression. "Do you think miracles are real, Mr. Robert?" For the first time in a long time, Robert felt the old ache in his heart stir. He had spent so many years denying it, the possibility of something better, something beyond the pain. Could he truly believe in miracles again? "I don't know," he replied softly, "but maybe you can show me." The next few days passed in a blur for Robert. He had no idea why he kept thinking about Jasmine, why her simple words about miracles kept echoing in his mind. He had no intention of becoming a different man, of opening himself up again to something as foolish as hope. But for some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't just her visit. It was the way she had looked at him, as if she believed in the possibility of good in a world that had been so unkind to him. Jasmine had shown him a glimpse of something he had long buried: kindness. Her pure, untainted heart had pierced through the walls of his cynicism. He had been bitter for so long, toward the world, toward himself. But now, he was left wondering if there was more to life than this endless cycle of loneliness and regret. Then, one evening, just as the sun began to set, he heard the knock again. This time, there was no hesitation in his step. He knew it was Jasmine, and as he wheeled himself to the door, he wondered what would happen next. What did a girl like her want from him? What could he possibly offer in return? When he opened the door, Jasmine stood there, holding something small in her hands, something delicate, a flower, wrapped carefully in an old newspaper. "I came back to say thank you," she said, her eyes shining with sincerity. Robert stared at the flower, his heart caught in his throat. He had expected nothing, but in that small, fragile bloom, he saw a symbol of the miracle he had long since stopped believing in, a chance for redemption, for change. "I don't know if you can make me walk again," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I'll try to believe in the miracle." Jasmine left that night, but something had changed in Robert. The next day, he found himself walking through the mansion, noticing things he had ignored for years: the dust on the bookshelves, the neglect in the corners of the rooms. It wasn't just his mansion that had fallen into disrepair, it was his life. Without thinking, he called his assistant and asked her to arrange a donation of food to a local shelter. He wasn't sure why he was doing it, but he knew it was a step in the right direction. The days of sitting in isolation, wallowing in his misery, were over. There was more to life than his wealth. There was more to life than his regrets. But Jasmine's impact on him didn't end there. As the days went by, he found himself thinking about her even more. He couldn't help but wonder how a little girl, with so little of her own, could give him so much. He decided to visit her. He couldn't let this chance pass him by. The following week, Robert found himself standing in front of Jasmine's apartment building, staring up at the modest structure. He had driven past it countless times before, but never once had he truly seen it. His life had been so far removed from the lives of people like Jasmine, so far removed from the everyday struggles of those who had to fight for each meal, each moment of hope. As he approached the door, a deep feeling of shame washed over him. Here he was, this man of wealth and influence, standing on the doorstep of a struggling single mother's home. What could he possibly offer that would make any difference? He knocked gently, and after a moment, the door opened. Margaret Thompson, Jasmine's mother, stood in the doorway, her face weary yet warm. Her tired eyes softened as she recognized Robert. "Mr. Robert," she said, her voice filled with cautious surprise. "Is something wrong?" Robert hesitated. He wasn't sure why he had come. Perhaps it was to ask for forgiveness for his past indifference. Perhaps it was to thank them for making him realize how far he had fallen from the person he once was. But as he looked at Margaret, his words felt inadequate. Instead, he simply looked down at Jasmine, who was standing behind her mother, her big brown eyes filled with curiosity. "I wanted to thank you," he said, finally finding his voice. "Thank you for your kindness, for showing me that there's still good in this world." Jasmine's face lit up with a bright smile, and for the first time in years, Robert felt something he had long forgotten: hope. He wasn't sure what had changed in him, but something had. He had always thought that his wealth and status were enough to make him happy. But now he realized that true happiness came from connection, from compassion, from allowing others to help him when he needed it the most. Margaret stepped aside, allowing him to enter the modest home. "It's not much," she said, a little embarrassed. "But you're welcome here, Mr. Robert." Robert glanced around the small apartment, taking in the cramped space and the worn furniture. It was nothing like the opulence he was used to, yet there was a warmth here, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the wealth or material possessions that mattered. It was the love, the care, the sense of community. He smiled softly and nodded. It's more than enough. Thank you. Days passed, and Robert found himself visiting Jasmine and her mother more frequently. Each time he left their apartment, he felt a strange lightness in his heart. Their simple lives, their deep connection to one another, reminded him of everything he had lost. But there was something else there, too. Something he had forgotten: joy. One evening, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Robert returned home after another visit. He had brought gifts this time: new clothes for Jasmine and a special treat for her mother. The gesture was small, but it meant something to him. He had spent so much of his life hoarding his wealth, but now he was starting to see the value in giving. As he wheeled himself into the grand, empty mansion, a small knock on the door caught his attention. Robert wheeled over slowly, his curiosity piqued. When he opened it, he was surprised to see Jasmine standing on the threshold, her face alight with excitement. "Mr. Robert," she said, holding something small in her hands. "I brought you something." Robert smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "What's this, Jasmine?" She handed him the object carefully. It was a small flower, wrapped in an old piece of newspaper, the petals slightly wilting from the journey. "It's for you. I thought you might need something to remind you that miracles can happen. They don't always come like you expect, but they come." Robert's heart stopped for a moment. It was a simple gesture, but the weight of it was profound. In that small, fragile flower, he saw the miracle that Jasmine had been talking about, the miracle of kindness, the miracle of believing in the goodness of others. He gently took the flower from her hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Jasmine. This is the greatest gift I've ever received." Jasmine beamed, her smile infectious. "I'm glad you like it, Mr. Robert. Mama always says that gratitude is the best miracle." Over the next few weeks, Robert continued his visits to Jasmine and her mother. He found himself looking forward to their time together, cherishing every moment of warmth and connection that he had once shunned. The walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling, and in their place, a new sense of purpose began to form. Robert's heart softened in ways he had never thought possible. He realized how much he had neglected in his own life, how much he had taken for granted. His wealth, his status, they meant nothing in comparison to the true wealth of human connection. One evening, as Robert sat with Jasmine and Margaret, a thought occurred to him. He had spent so much of his life trying to fill the emptiness inside with things, money, power, and possessions. But now, he understood that the things that mattered most were intangible. They were love, kindness, and the small, everyday moments of life. "I've been thinking," Robert began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I've been so focused on trying to make my life perfect, on having everything I thought I needed. But you've shown me that the best things in life can't be bought." Margaret looked up from her work, her expression softening. "We're just regular people, Mr. Robert, but we've learned a lot from you, too. You've taught us that you can change, that you can start over, no matter what." Robert smiled, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He wasn't perfect, he wasn't invincible, but he had something now that he hadn't had in years: hope, and he was ready to embrace it. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, Robert began to feel the changes within himself. He became more active, more engaged with the world around him. The bitterness that had once consumed him began to fade, replaced by a new sense of purpose. His life had meaning again, not because of his wealth, but because of the people he had opened his heart to. One evening, as he sat in his wheelchair by the window, gazing out at the falling snow, something strange happened. His legs, which had been numb for so long, suddenly felt different. There was a subtle tingling, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Robert's heart raced. He shook his head, unsure if what he was feeling was real. But when he placed his hand on his knee, the sensation intensified, a warmth that spread slowly through his body. He wheeled himself to the bathroom, staring at his reflection in disbelief. Could it be? Could this miracle, this impossible thing, actually be happening? He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. But then, without thinking, he pushed against the wall, using his arms to lift his body. For the first time in decades, he felt his legs move. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him believe. A tear slipped down his cheek, and he whispered to himself, "I never thought this would happen, but it's happening." The miracle didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Robert's condition improved in ways the doctors had never thought possible. The tingling in his legs turned into small movements. He could feel his feet. He could wiggle his toes. It was a miracle, yes, but it wasn't just the physical recovery. It was the emotional transformation that had occurred within him. Robert didn't need his legs to walk anymore. He didn't need his fortune to feel whole. He had learned something far more valuable: how to live with love and humility. And that was the greatest miracle of all. The next morning, as Robert sat in the garden with Jasmine, he reached out to take her hand. "You were right," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "The miracle wasn't about my legs. It was about learning to believe again. It was about kindness, about seeing the world through a different lens." Jasmine smiled, her eyes filled with joy. "I'm glad, Mr. Robert. I always knew miracles happen when you believe." And in that moment, Robert realized that the true miracle wasn't the return of his mobility, but the rediscovery of his humanity. He had been given the chance to start over, to rebuild the life he had once lost, and he wasn't going to waste it. As the sun rose over the mansion, Robert, Jasmine, and Margaret stood together, no longer divided by wealth or status. They were bound together by something far stronger: the miracle of love. If you enjoyed Robert's incredible journey of transformation, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more uplifting content. Thanks for watching, and remember, miracles are all around us.